Mandragora is a game that takes inspiration from great Metroidvania titles like Hollow Knight, blending in that ever-so-spicy Souls-like combat. You play as an Inquisitor, and you're in a grim dark world, fighting monsters and hopefully getting a bit of pay along the way. If you're familiar with settings like Witcher 3 or maybe No Rest for the Wicked, this isn't going to be that different. And for the demo, your goal is to track down a witch near the city of Wickham, and then I would assume execute her, because after all, you are an Inquisitor. Recently, the dev sent me the demo to check out, so in today's video, I'm going to go through the demo gameplay, give some of my thoughts as I do, then talk about the major game systems that I noticed, cover a few frustrations or points of feedback, and finally wrap everything up with a little bit of a verdict. With that said, this is just a demo, and there's a lot that's probably going to change for a future release. So if you want to see more of my thoughts on the game, do be sure to get subscribed, and hey, maybe leave a like while you're down there. So the demo starts off simple enough. It gives you a basic enemy and says, hey, go whack 'em. With a lot of these basic foes, you can be quite aggressive, mixing your light attacks that cost stamina and your heavy attacks that cost adrenaline. In addition, you have the ability to block, dodge, and parry, but personally I didn't really like the block and parry very much, so I mostly just stuck to dodging. Also, as I continued to explore, I noticed a nice little demonic portal. Now, while I didn't find any relevance to this for the rest of the demo, I do suspect in the full game it's going to be something meaningful. Most of the exploring is, of course, platforming. There's nice little glowy ledges, that means you can jump to it and grab on as a handhold, which is also a safe way to descend, because if you fall from too high up, yes, there is fall damage, and it can be fatal. Also, as you're going through and exploring, keep an eye out for resources, because these are gatherable and they appear in the world. You use resources for cooking and crafting, making a variety of consumables and upgrading your gear. Something else about the terrain that's really cool is sometimes enemies will pop out behind you. And if you look really closely here, they even have friendly fire. These little touches are super cool, and I love the fact that the enemies have friendly fire here. The whole ambush thing, it's kind of like if you're playing a Souls game and you walk through a doorway, you can expect there to be some sort of enemy lurking in the side of a doorway to stab you. But in this case, you can often see the enemies lurking off to the side of a terrain, making it a little more likely you'll notice the ambush before it happens. I also like it because, as a 2.5D game, this is very much adding that illusion of 3D space in what is otherwise a 2D world. Similar to how in Ori and the Blind Forest, you'll often see things moving throughout the background even if you as Ori can't interact with it directly. Something else I noticed is the devs put a lot of effort into the voice acting here, where even minor characters and one-off enemies like these bandits do have some voice acting.
Hey, where do you think you're going? Give you a choice, head or guts.
When it comes to bandits, fighting one enemy is pretty darn simple, but fighting multiple enemies does get a little bit tricky. What I found is rolling to control distance and then sometimes knocking the unlucky bandit off a ledge by attacking them repeatedly was the best way to deal with these group conflicts. But beyond simply getting through a level, exploring the little nooks and crannies can definitely pay off, because treasure chests have rare items. Just keep in mind that number 1, you'll probably need to do a little bit of jumping to reach them, and number 2, you need a lockpick to open them, since lockpicks are consumable. If you run out, you're not going to be opening that shiny treasure chest, just remember its location and come back later. Now overall, I'd say most of the enemies aren't too bad in a one-on-one fight, with the one exception of these shield bandits. These shield bandits are a total pain, and I mean that in the best possible way. They're the kind of annoying enemy that you just love to hate, or maybe hate that you love. Because they're big and they're imposing, their attacks are slow and they hit very hard. All relatively simple stuff, but when you put 2 of them together, oh man, it is such a pain to deal with them, because sometimes they use an ability where they drop a shield wall. If you attack them, they will stun you temporarily and retaliate. But the normal tactic of attack an enemy then roll through when they attack doesn't work if there's 2 of them and they face in opposite directions and both drop their shield wall. So you might have to do some kiting, try to eliminate one as quickly as possible. Overall, as annoying as these enemies were, I'm super glad they're in the demo because they posed a fun challenge. Now, speaking of exploration, much like a Metroidvania or a Souls game, you can often double back to open up new pathways. Not only does this make it easier to retraverse an area, but it might mean sometimes there's a hidden little nook, cranny, or treasure that you missed the first time, where, after coming at it from the opposite direction, you're going to be able to see it. While I didn't find any grappling hook or double jump in the demo, there were sections that alluded to getting to platforms that you can't reach currently, and it was also alluded to that there is a grappling hook, which of course opens up more areas for exploration. If I somehow missed the grappling hook, then please let me know so I can go back and try it, because that sounds really cool. About halfway through, you get to the city of Wickham itself. And here's where the game takes a little bit of a lighter tone. In fact, there's even a guy who's a VLDL reference, which is hilarious and awesome.
Evening. Nice day for fishing, ain't it?
Something else I really like is the way the developer uses their 2.5D environment. Because sometimes the door you're looking for isn't going to be found by side-scrolling. It's not to the left and it's not to the right. It's actually staring you right in the face. I like this because, like with many other 2.5D platformers, it helps make the world feel more like a realistic 3D object than just something that's flat, even though it is literally something that's flat. Something else I found in this area, which I wasn't as much a fan of, are traps. You should not roll through them. You take damage if you do, but you can jump over them, and for the projectile traps, you can block them with your shield. It was one of the few times that I really liked the block. But something about some of these just felt very slightly off. I think it's because the hitbox is super, super aggressive, and there's a good chance you will take damage if you get anywhere near it when it triggers. Then, right as you're homing in on the witch, the demo ends with a boss battle against the caretaker. Which, fun fact, this is the same boss from the pre-alpha demo that I played about 2 years ago now. Well, I say the same boss, he's the same character, but he's undergone quite a mechanical overhaul. The fight was definitely a bit stressful, and my first time through, I struggled with it quite a bit. On my second time through, it was kind of a breeze, because it turns out that while the moveset takes a bit to learn, it's very, very fair. There's nothing that felt bullshit, there's nothing that felt unexpected. Once you got the pattern down, you're able to dodge pretty much everything. Unless you're bad like me, in which case you're going to get hit a few times. So to wrap up my thoughts on the demo, here's the fight against the caretaker.
That was tough.
Alright, so now let's get into some of the systems that I noticed throughout the Mandragora demo. First up, the game has a skill tree. And I think I've seen this kind of thing used before. I mean, I'm sure there's another game I've played that had like nodes, and some of them gave you attributes and they traveled to other nodes that were bigger. And then they had even bigger nodes with specialized effects. I can't remember. It might have been Bath something, maybe Path something. Let me know down below if you can think of that game. But in the demo, unfortunately, you only got access to one tree, which I was a little disappointed in because all the other trees look really cool and it looks like they're going to enable a lot of different playstyles. Where in this case, you have a sword and board character. But if you want to be a pyromancer and just light up all your enemies, you should be able to do that. In fact, it looks like you're going to be able to play in a way that you don't really get into too much melee combat at all. And all of that is supported by the skill tree. You access this via the witch stones. When you rest at a witch stone, you heal, your resources are replenished, minus, of course, consumables. Enemies respawn in the world, this might all be sounding a little bit familiar, and you can level up, because your EXP is lost on death. Obviously, you have to go back to where you died and reclaim it. You know, all of the standard Souls-like mechanics. And for the most part, I found these save points to be pretty generous. So if I was going into something dangerous, or I just finished something dangerous, there was usually a save point to track my progress. As for combat itself, there's a lot of tactical blocking or dodging back and forth. Personally, I ended up preferring the dodging back and forth as opposed to the tactical block. So for most enemies, the pattern's going to be attack a few times. As they start to attack, roll through them. Sometimes you can roll away, but most of the time rolling through is strictly the better option. They will, after a short delay, turn around and attack you again. There's no, the enemy's just stuck because you're behind them thing, which is really good. So you fall into this really nice pattern. I suspect the combat isn't going to be for everyone, especially because it's not super complex, but I think by keeping it simple, the devs have made it very approachable, and through all sorts of crazy skills, you're going to be able to make it more complicated later. Also, when you're fighting multiple foes, that is a fair bit trickier. For the skills that I had in the demo, there was basically a light attack that built up adrenaline, I'd be able to use it a few times before running out of stamina. Then there's a heavy attack that consumed all the adrenaline, inflicted a light bleed on foes, and did pretty heavy damage as it did so. But throughout the course of playing, I got several other skills. Unfortunately, during the demo, I was not able to use them. But it looks like you'll be able to do things like throw traps, cast spells, all sorts of fun stuff that's very, very different, which should allow a fair variety of freedom to customize things to a playstyle that you personally prefer. I also got a variety of equipment throughout the demo. So for example, one of the bandits with a big shield, I beat him and I got his big shield. And then I started fat rolling, so I immediately took it off because I wasn't really going to be using it to block anyway. I also found a really big oversized sword that was surprisingly fast and worked really well, so I used it for the rest of the demo on both playthroughs. The loot kind of reminds me of ARPGs a little more than Dark Souls. I don't know why, I think it's just the randomness of it primarily dropping from enemies as opposed to coming from bosses, but either way, I'm down. And then there's the caravan. You're going to meet several NPCs throughout the demo, and each of them is a vendor who provides a specific function, whether it's a tailor who can craft you stuff, or a blacksmith who can craft you stuff and upgrade your weapons, or more interestingly, an enchanter who allows you to make runes, and then you use those runes to enchant special effects on the armor pieces that you get, vastly enhancing them. That's really cool. Or Gerald, who reveals your map, allowing you to see way more things like resource spawns, details, and even secrets throughout the world. The other thing that I noticed is these various NPCs can be leveled up. So as you craft stuff and as you interact with them, they gain experience, and as they gain experience, they offer more services. I would assume they also become better at doing their job. So this is a fun little system that provides a little bit of side progression. It's also a good reason to explore stuff out in the world, though I'm always a little hesitant with things like this because if the costs to upgrade them later are too aggressive to the point where I feel like I have to go around and grind materials, then it's going to get tedious rather than fun. But as long as they level up pretty naturally as you progress and play the game, I'm generally in favor of systems like that. With that said, there are a few things in the demo that frustrated me. The first was the default keybinds. Dodge, by default, is on right trigger on the controller, but I'm very used to dodge being on B from, well, Souls games. And having parry overlap with a light attack further led to a frustrating early game experience. Here's a little bit of gameplay from before I rebound things, where my dodges are very stiff, because I'd sometimes dodge by accident when I didn't mean to, or I'd mean to dodge, but I'd hit B, which wouldn't be dodge, and it would just cause problems. Now I know there are some games that do use this control scheme of dodge on right trigger, but it'd be really nice if when you started the demo or when you started the game, there's just like a few default control schemes that are very transparent that you get to pick from. It's not too bad to go into the menu and rebind things for yourself, but unfortunately I suspect that for everyone who just goes, oh, I can rebind this, there's going to be someone who's like, this game feels terrible. I don't know why, but it just does. And they give it a pass as a result. The reason I didn't like parry overlapping with light attack is because you'd hit X to attack, you'd hit left trigger to block, you'd hit left trigger plus X to parry. And of course, like most parry systems, the timing is pretty darn tight. So what I found I'd do is I'd be holding my shield to block an attack, then I'd want to lower my shield and use X to attack the enemy because they had already used their attack. And instead what I'd do is I'd lower my shield, and as I did, I'd parry, which means I don't attack them, which means my attack doesn't have a chance to stagger them. So then they get an opportunity to attack me sooner than they otherwise would have. This is part of why I kind of stopped blocking and just went straight for dodging. Now, when it comes to this stuff, my personal preference is that you don't have a separate block and parry button, that instead your parry is a reward for doing a perfect block, raising your shield just as an enemy attacks you. This way you can still reward players for skillful play without doing all the awkward block then parry kind of stuff. Now, the next one's kind of a big concern I have. And that is that the platforming feels clunky and sluggish. A lot of the time, as you jump, you grab the edge, then you have to hit the jump button again for your character to pull themselves up, which is annoying if you're trying to avoid traps or if enemies are likely to attack you. And on top of this, the character's able to attack in the air, but everything just feels really sluggish and unresponsive. The side-scrolling combat when you're on the ground feels really, really good. I think they've absolutely nailed that. I'd like to see a little bit more tuning done for the aerial combat and the jumps in general. Maybe in most cases just have the character automatically when they grab the ledge, pull themselves up quickly doing a small quick animation. Now next up, I'm going to be honest, this one's really small. It's a nitpick / pet peeve. But when I was messing around with a big shield, and I crouched down, it looked like my character was holding the shield in front of him, and I thought, oh, that's really cool. You're rewarded for crouching down and having a big shield. You're protected. No, you're not protected. You just get shot in the face. And I was very sad when I learned this. Now, something else I found on my first playthrough where I struggled a little bit against the caretaker is the run back was surprisingly long. Overall, the game does a really good job of checkpointing you with the witch stones, but there's not one right before the caretaker. And I know a lot of games do this. They want you to run past the enemies so that your resources are potentially sapped, or maybe so you're encouraged to grind a little bit more and get stronger before just throwing yourself at the boss. But one thing I really liked about Elden Ring was the fact that it didn't do that. If I wanted to throw myself at the boss, I could just be right in front of it, there's a checkpoint, and I can keep doing it over and over and over again until I killed the boss, or until I decided, you know what, I'm just not good enough right now, so I'm going to go elsewhere and grind for a bit. So I really think all of the bosses, or at the very least the more major story bosses, should have some sort of checkpoint right before them. Last up, 2 other minor complaints, one of which is the animated NPC combos. I don't know, they just look really creepy. I think it's because the portrait of a face isn't moving much, but the eyes, man, they're just staring into my soul. It felt super uncanny valley, and I kind of hated it. And then last up, something that's more a complaint about the demo rather than the game itself. You get a lot of cool stuff during it. Daggers, other spells, all sorts of things that I really would have loved to try out. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to because I was missing things like a fire catalyst or an astral catalyst or assassination mastery. Stuff that I'm suspecting you're going to be able to specialize in or invest in some way in the actual game. For example, I believe when I played the alpha demo, the character was a pyromancer, so he did have that fiery offhand I could use. But it would have been nice to experiment with a few more playstyles rather than being stuck on the sword and board, especially since I think the different playstyles are going to be one of Mandragora's strengths. So overall, I had quite a bit of fun with the Mandragora demo. I don't know exactly how long it's going to be available for, but I do know it goes up as of when this video is airing on September 30th, and at the very least is going to be available through the next Steam Next Fest, which runs from October 14th to October 21st. That said, I will link to the demo down in the description, and I strongly recommend that if this looks at all interesting to you, you check it out for yourself. And you know what? Even if you go, based on everything you've said, 10, I don't think this game looks very good, it's not for me, maybe check the demo out anyway. Make your own opinion, because it could just be that I didn't touch on the things that you personally look for in games. Personally, I am still going to be following Mandragora. Again, get subscribed if you want to see future content on it. Leave a like if you found this helpful. And in terms of the thing that I'm most excited for, I want to try those skill trees. And I want to try all the different skills because the build crafting here looks really cool. And I suspect there's going to be a lot of stuff where you get to break the game. And by break the game, I mean do things that the developers all technically intended for you to be able to do, just not quite in the way that they intended, and it's going to do way too much damage. You're going to melt bosses instantly. It's going to be a really good time. But hey, with that said, maybe you want to take a trip down memory lane. If so, I'm going to link up in the card and down below to my original video on Mandragora, where I played the pre-alpha demo, and you can see some of those changes in action for yourself. In general, I'm a pretty big fan of Metroidvanias. I don't know, maybe it's because the games that I grew up on were a lot of those platformers. I played a lot of the early Metroids. I remember Legend of Zelda, which, okay, not quite a platformer, but you know what, close enough. It has that Metroidvania feel in a lot of ways with how Nintendo crafted their world. And I've also found that a lot of the indie Metroidvanias are really good. So if you want another good Metroidvania that I can absolutely recommend, check out my review for Ori and the Blind Forest, which to this day is my favorite title in the genre. It's over on my second channel. I'll link it down below. You can check it out if that interests you. But hey, either way, I'm glad you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching to the end, and I'll see you in the next one.